Welcome to I Know How You Feel, a podcast for common experiences not so commonly shared. This is a platform for growth, connection, and mindful conversation. Today on the podcast, we have Francie. Francie is a patient and licensed clinical social worker with a focus on the intersection of mental and physical health. The following conversation reflects Francie's personal experiences and perspectives. She is speaking solely on her own behalf, and her views do not represent any medical institution, organization, or advocacy group. This information is for informational and storytelling purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional for any medical concerns. Let's go ahead and connect with Francie. Hi, Francie. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Your story is so inspiring to me, and so I'm very excited to have this platform for you to bring your story to others as well.
Thank you.
So I just want to go ahead and have you start by telling us what Ehlers-Danlos is, and you can tell me if I pronounce that wrong.
No, that was great.
Okay.
Some people call it Ehlers, some people call it Ehlers, but Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a condition which unfortunately we don't know enough about, but it's a condition that affects the body's connective tissue. And the connective tissue in the body is what's responsible for making up all of your skin, your blood vessels, your joints, your organs. It really is everywhere in the body. And in EDS, there is seemingly some sort of dysfunction in either the formation of the collagen or the repair of the collagen, and it manifests in a lot of various ways. There's a pretty wide range of symptoms associated with the condition because of how many systems in the body have collagen or connective tissue in them. I say collagen and connective tissue kind of interchangeably, so I'm sorry if that's confusing. To date, there are 13 types of EDS, and 12 of those types have known genetic causes. And one of those types, which is the type that I have, is unclear in where its origin lies and kind of how people develop it. There is suspicion that it could be inherited, and we see some families with patterns of EDS that suggest that there's a genetic predisposition to it. However, we've yet to identify the gene or the genes associated with it. So it's kind of TBD as to understanding more about the condition.
And how did you come upon your diagnosis?
It's a great question. So it took a long, long time. My experience with chronic illness started all the way back in 2010. I was an exchange student studying abroad in Cape Town, South Africa, playing field hockey over there, running track, very active. And I contracted an Epstein-Barr virus, which in South Africa, they refer to the disease associated with it as glandular fever. And here in the US, we know it as mono or mononucleosis. So I contracted that infection and had pretty normal Epstein-Barr, glandular fever, mono symptoms at first. And so I was very fatigued. I had the swollen lymph nodes. I spent a lot of time kind of trying to rest in bed, and ultimately developed a number of symptoms on top of that that aren't characteristic of the condition. And so we started to wonder what might be going on. The fatigue just persisted, and I started to have pre-syncopal episodes. So upon standing, when I would go from either sitting or lying to standing, I would have my vision go black. And we later figured out that this was because the blood vessels in the lower half of my body weren't constricting properly. And so the blood would pool in my lower extremities, and I wouldn't get blood and therefore oxygen to my brain in time to adjust to the change in posture. That's a process that happens automatically when other people stand up, and it became dysregulated in me following this infection. And ultimately, that led me to a diagnosis of something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a form of dysautonomia, also known as a chronic malfunction of the autonomic nervous system. So, the autonomic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that's responsible for controlling all of the bodily functions that happen automatically and usually unconsciously. So, everything from digestion to pupil dilation to temperature regulation. So, all of that was pretty out of whack following this infection, and I have continued to live with that autonomic malfunction ever since. And it was kind of through seeking care for that condition that I ultimately learned about a very common comorbidity with Ehlers-Danlos. So in the very beginning, one of my cardiologists said, I'm seeing a lot of patients with POTS presenting with this joint laxity that you also have, or this hypermobility. And I think you should be seen to make sure that you don't have it as well. So this was in 2013. I go to CHOPS, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Metabolic Disease Clinic, and I was told that I did not have a diagnosis of EDS. Then fast forward the following year, at this point I'm in college, I'm continuing to have very persistent and debilitating symptoms. This is January 2024. I'm at the Mayo Clinic, and yet again, I'm told that I don't meet criteria for the subtypes of EDS. And then finally, later that year, while we were still searching for solutions to my continued symptomatology, I was seen at Penn Medicine in their genetics department. And yet again, I was told that I didn't have EDS. So I kind of dropped it. I thought, okay, I'm not an EDS patient. And I went on with my life, continuing to try to manage the POTS and simultaneously dealing with kind of an increasing variety of symptoms. I ultimately developed ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune disease that affects your colon. And I was dealing with a lot of symptoms of mast cell activation syndrome. And then it wasn't until after I graduated from college when I had the opportunity to see one of the foremost authorities on EDS, a geneticist, that she was able to officially diagnose me with hypermobile EDS. And that's one of the tricky things about the condition, is that if you are in that 13th subtype, the hypermobile, and there is not a gene associated with it, the diagnosis for it is based on clinical criterion, and that can be very subject to the doctor's discretion. And if a doctor is not looking at EDS patients commonly and not seeing kind of some of the telltale signs that are a little more subtle, then they might miss the diagnosis. So it wasn't until 20 that I was diagnosed.
So how many years is that? How long did it take?
So 2010 was the infection and the start of the kind of acute symptoms, and 2017 was the diagnosis. So that's 7 years later. But retrospectively, even before 2010, I had um, what now we understand to be kind of an abnormal amount of orthopedic injuries, with subluxations of my knees and dislocation of my shoulder. Looking back, I probably was symptomatic since more early adolescence, but just not in as debilitating a way as I was by 2010.
You speak so intelligently about EDS and the conditions that you have. I feel like that's almost like a response. People have to become their
Yeah.
own advocates, and they have to deep dive into Google and WebMD and get books and really look into things
Mhm.
and become their own advocates and be able to speak intelligently on their conditions because doctors blow them off a lot. And that's a pattern I see quite a bit in people with chronic
Yeah,
illness.
yeah, I had some very, very unfortunate experiences, especially early on in my illness, but as recently as honestly the past year, where physicians who are not well versed in these conditions, who aren't used to kind of working with folks with amorphous diseases that have a wide variety of symptoms, can be very dismissive, very invalidating. They just aren't equipped to handle the uncertainty and kind of the need to suspend black and white thinking to be able to help someone with this condition. And that could be really harmful, honestly. There's actually great research out there done by a bioethicist at University of Indiana on traumatic invalidation and how frequently EDS patients go through this diagnostic odyssey, and through it are experience a lot of psychological harm at the hands of invalidating or dismissive physicians.
I've definitely seen that. I'm wondering if that was your initial reaction when you finally got your diagnosis. Did you just immediately go into research mode? What was your initial reaction to having that diagnosis handed to you and being like, finally.
Yeah, it's a great question. The first diagnosis, so before I was diagnosed with POTS, it was a very strange situation, and the universe works in mysterious ways. But I was on bed rest at home, seemingly recovering from an Epstein-Barr virus, and my parents let me know that one of our family friends from childhood, who I hadn't seen in over a decade, was diagnosed with this crazy condition called POTS, and she's been going through so much, and she's suffering tremendously. And I'll never forget the night that they told me that, and they went out to dinner, and I was staying at home in bed resting, and I went to Google and I looked up this condition that my old friend Allie had, and they came home and I was sobbing and they were like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Guys, I have this. I know I have this. This is exactly what I'm experiencing." And I don't fault them for this because, of course, they could not have known at the time. Um, they were trusting the doctors, as most people do originally, but they said, "Oh, Franz, of course you don't have this. Don't worry. Like, you have mono and you're going to get better. And what Allie has is chronic. And this is a different situation. And I'm sorry you're so scared, but it'll be okay." And then I distinctly remember, so that was probably late August, early September. And a couple months later, October 28th of that year, I was diagnosed by an infectious disease specialist at the University of Johns Hopkins. And he came in and said, "I have good news and bad news. You don't have Lyme," which is what I was being worked up for, "but you have POTS." And my mom, I remember, was so relieved for us to finally have a diagnosis because it had been a pretty harrowing couple months trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember being just devastated because I had done enough reading about Allie's condition that I knew this was not going to be an easy journey.
That's something I hear so often is that people with chronic illness are just looking things up and being their own advocates and basically being their own doctors and bringing the research to the doctors and being like, here you go. This is what I found on me. Can you please work me up for this? Can you please do labs for this? And it's absolutely exhausting. When
Yeah.
you finally got the EDS diagnosis, was the reaction similar? Had you kind of given up on that? Because you said after being told 3 times that this isn't what you had, were you kind of like, well, maybe I'll just research in a different direction, or had you looked into a lot and you were sure that this is what you had?
I remember kind of giving up on it and also being preoccupied with a lot of other stuff that had developed. The ulcerative colitis became a top priority. I was diagnosed through skin biopsy with a small fiber polyneuropathy, and I had some blood go through a research lab that was suggesting that the autonomic malfunction was likely autoimmune. So I was kind of floating in the autoimmune world, trying to see if immune modulation would be helpful. And quite frankly, during that period, I went through so much trial and error, and through all of my illness, I've been out of necessity. I've had to try so many different things because there isn't a standard of care, and so we don't have reliable options for successfully ameliorating these symptoms or treating them. So I dealt with tons of complications, from everything from medication side effects to just I would have a procedure and there would be subsequent recovery from it that was unexpected, or it was just it has been a really arduous journey, and it continues to this day. I wish I could say that things became more streamlined and it's gotten really obvious what to do. But to this day, I still grapple when I have flares with how best to manage them, knowing that there's not a clear, obvious answer usually. And we can only do the best with what information we have and try to be patient and compassionate about what a hard process that is.
It's really tough to feel like you're floating in that in between. And I know you were going through a lot of this when you were, like you said, in high school and in college. And something I hear a lot about the chronic illness community is just the feeling of missing out on things. Did you feel that?
I did. I absolutely did. I think the age at which I got sick was an incredibly difficult age to be sidelined in the way I was, just when a lot of my peers were gaining more and more independence from their parents and families. I was feeling all the more restricted in what I could do and how I could kind of become my own person. I would say I very much felt like um, in order to get through school and to get through college, I had to be dependent and reliant on my parents in a way that is not characteristic of that age. And so I really think my individuating, like a very necessary developmental process that needs to occur for someone to grow into adulthood, was delayed. And so I really had to face a lot of that post college, whereas a lot of folks are able to take some of those steps earlier, um, and maybe more so alongside their peers. It felt a little bit lonely to be going through that and trying to come into myself. In many ways, I still am, and we all are. We're all evolving, but I felt like I was doing it a little bit out of step with other people, and there was great loneliness and pain to that.
That does sound really lonely. Besides the missing out part, what other types of grief come up when you have flares or you're working through hard things with your illness?
So the thing that is by far the most painful is all of the internalized shame that I experience. There is a lot of judgment and ableism in the world that puts on people who are chronically ill a sense of blame. It stigmatizes them. There's kind of this ethos that in some cases your suffering is your fault, or you should be doing more to get to a better place. And while I know I've committed myself entirely to trying to heal, those voices kind of get to me in the back of my head when I'm at my in my weak moments and when I'm struggling the most and when I'm in the most pain, and they just exacerbate the pain. And it's really sad to me that I've been exposed to those beliefs and that they've kind of taken hold. And I think that they took hold at an age when I was so impressionable, right? Like I said, I wasn't yet um, solid in my sense of identity. And so my identity was formed during a phase when people were telling me things that aren't true and are painful to grapple with. This idea that it may be my fault that this is all happening to me, or a sign that something is wrong with me spiritually, which is something you can hear a lot in the religious communities, or even just the sense of like blaming and pathologizing mental illness. So the idea that, oh, if you're anxious, that's what's causing your symptoms, and not a really nuanced appreciation for the ways in which having a condition characterized by so much uncertainty can actually cause a lot of anxiety. And there's no doubt that it's been a process to figure out how to manage the anxiety and the grief associated with all of my symptoms so that I don't exacerbate them unnecessarily. But the blame and the shame part is unnecessary, and it's been really hurtful.
I think this is a really important conversation because I agree. I think that there's there's such a grind culture that we live in and such a pushy culture to do more, to fix ourselves. You know, if you have chronic illness or if you're sick, like I fixed it this way. I just took a pill. I mean, social media is one of the worst places
Oh,
for
it's
people with
brutal.
chronic illness to go. And I mean, um, obviously this podcast is not about me, but speaking as someone who does have chronic illness, like it does feel overwhelming because you get on those platforms and like you said, there's a lot of shame. Like they have what you have and they fixed it this way. Why can't I fix it that way? They're doing it this way. Why can't I? And so I just think it's so important that you brought that up because we're all individual and our bodies all
Mhm.
react different to different things in different environments and different treatments. And it it's okay to not be fixable. We don't need to be
Yeah.
fixed. We just need to everybody just needs to take a step back and let people be who they are.
Yeah, and I think, like I said earlier, I think some of it comes from the ableism in our society, and this idea that there is an ideal, and that is perfect functional health, and that anything less than that is something to, like you said, fix and erase and repair. And one of the most healing things that has not only healed me kind of in my soul, but has also reduced my physical burden is getting to a place where I accept a new normal. And that was really, really hard for me. I remember for the first number of years, I was fighting tirelessly. I've seen probably 170 doctors, and all of that time fighting for what had been and who the state of health I had lost and wanting to get back to that. And it wasn't until I was willing to come to a place of acceptance, which required a great amount of grieving what I thought, the kind of the presumed future I had. But once I was able to accept that and grieve it, it was actually from that place that I saw greater change and greater improvement in my quality of life.
I really love that because accepting a new normal doesn't encompass any of the toxic positivity platitudes that come around when you're
Mhm.
trying to kind of grow through things. I'm wondering what other coping skills do you have now that you didn't have before?
Yeah, I've had to build an arsenal of physical and psychological and spiritual kind of options to turn to. And they vary. So there's a lot of ways in which I've learned to move my body that feel healthy, and I do very consistently. I do a lot of posture focused Pilates and low impact cardio exercise that makes me feel strong and good. And then there are all these little things that I can do physically that just bring more comfort to very painful situations, whether it's ice packs or whether it's related to how I feed myself and the environment I'm in, all that is very important. And then, kind of in the emotional realm, I've benefited immensely from a very consistent mindfulness practice. So, my daily meditator, I do a lot of embodiment work, so a lot of somatic based meditation, things like yoga nidra and body scans. And most recently, I've been benefiting a lot from a specific type of therapy called pain reprocessing therapy. It's been really eye-opening and beneficial, and I'm even just at the start of it. So I'm even more excited about what's to come from it. And it is a long, slow process when you've been living with a condition like this for so long. But even just seeing those little bouts of relief are tremendously motivating because they're rare. And when you find them, you really hold on to them and you continue to seek out more and more of them. So that's been so helpful. I actually work as a dialectical behavior therapist. So I help folks learn how to regulate emotion better, how to tolerate distress better, how to communicate with others better. And all of those things are necessary for managing anyone's life. But when you add the stress of living with chronic illness, they especially come in handy. And then my spiritual life has been particularly important as well. I had a deep, deep healing, meaningful connection with my late service dog, Patty, a dear golden retriever who came into my life while I was in college on medical leave. He unfortunately passed just a little over a year ago, but the impact that he had on me and my soul is forever going to stay with me and was life-saving, really. And then I continue to seek friendships that cultivate strong spiritual life and kind of a faith in the goodness of myself and all sentient beings, right? All living things out there. We're all interconnected, and it's important to honor that as best we can.
I love this diverse toolbox that you've built. I'm like taking notes over here. I'm like,
Oh,
what else can I put in my toolbox? These are great. I know it's taken you a lot of time to build this, and I just want to say to anybody out there that's struggling with chronic illness, this is like a top tier toolbox, and it takes a long
oh,
time to build this. So if you're not there yet, it's okay.
it is
Um,
okay. And
it's okay.
actually, one of the things that I didn't mention that's probably most important that um, I was hell bent um, on not using early on, but has been a game changer for me is pacing, is really trusting the process and knowing that everything is going to take the time it's going to take and kind of adapting my expectations around that and also adapting my lifestyle around that. I have a lot of fluctuation and I have to work with that rather than trying to work against that. Otherwise, I'll just suffer more.
That's a really good one. I want to switch gears a little bit. I recently read Fourth Wing. And for those of you who are not in the fantasy book world, Fourth Wing is the first book in a series that is set in a war college where dragons choose their riders. Everybody should go read it. Violet is the main character, and while the author really doesn't say it outright, the symptoms of EDS are reflected in Violet's physical struggles with hypermobility and joint pain. And I was curious about your thoughts on the portrayal of the main character and EDS in the book. I was very excited to ask you that.
Oh, I absolutely loved Fourth Wing. I was so excited. I picked it up not knowing anything about the connection to EDS. I've since learned that the author and some of her family members are affected by the condition, but I immediately fell in love with Violet, and she is definitely a hero of mine, a heroine, and I just had so much fun reading it. Reading is another one of my biggest, greatest coping skills. I immerse myself in books all the time, and it brings me so much joy. And balancing all of the pains of illness with joy is so important. And Fourth Wing was definitely a joyful experience, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out in 2025.
I agree. I absolutely loved it. And I love I loved the way that she didn't really downplay what she was feeling. She felt through it and it was obvious
Mhm.
that there was pain, but she did what she had to do to keep going. And I really
Absolutely.
appreciated that about the character where she wasn't just like, "Oh, I'm in pain. I'm going to put this aside." She's like, "I'm in pain and this is how I'm working through it and this is how I'm feeling through it." And so I just thought it was a really great representation.
There's such a power in what she teaches us in that book about the connection between the mind and the body. And I hate to even call it a connection. They are the same. The mind and the body are one, and medicine has bifurcated them in a way that's been very unhelpful. And we don't get to leverage the unity of them and the power of that without an awareness of it. And so all of her work with visualization and what I consider basically meditation um, is one of her greatest strengths in the book. And I love that that's the case.
Absolutely. Do you think there's enough representation in the media for EDS, or do you think this is one of the first modern representation that's in the popular media?
It's definitely one of the first I've encountered. Actually, I recently just read a book. I picked it up. It was a YA book, that I had no idea until the very end of the book that it was going to have a character with EDS. I'm gonna have to double check what the name of it was. I think it was called Icarus. Yeah, Icarus. It's by Kay Ancrum. Um, and yeah, it's very rare. And the same is true of autoimmune diseases, and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, the dysautonomia. All of them are so common, which is hard to appreciate because of how little representation there is. We think of them as rare because we don't see them commonly represented in media. But once you're aware of these conditions, you'll be shocked how many people are affected by them. And I think our awareness of that will just grow in the coming decades, especially as we see a lot of people affected by long COVID and similar kind of medical mysteries that impact the immune system, the nervous system, and all the other parts of the body.
I agree. I definitely think awareness is growing. And I'm sure too, you feel like just awareness for EDS has increased since your diagnosis. I feel like when we were back in high school, we had something chronic going on, and the doctors are just like, here's an allergy medication. I don't know what to do
Yeah,
for
yeah,
you.
I think so too. I think the awareness is so important, and even just in the past couple of years, I've read some of the most amazing books on this. I'm a bookie, so that's why I keep bringing them up. But I can't say enough about The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness by Sarah Raimi. Um, there's another book called oh gosh, here I'm gonna struggle with the name. The Invisible Kingdom. That's by Megan O'Rourke. Wrote The Invisible Kingdom: Reimagining Chronic Illness, among others. There's lots out there that is coming to the forefront, and I think that's so important.
I think so too. And something someone said on one of my previous podcasts that really stuck with me is that just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal.
Yeah,
And
that's well said.
I completely agree with that. This is a platform for common experiences that aren't very commonly shared, but that doesn't mean that your experience is normal. So I just want to encourage people, if you're having symptoms and you're frustrated, to just keep seeking help. You will find the right person. And I hope that Francie's story has inspired you, because it always inspires me. Thank you so much for coming
Oh,
on and chatting with me.
thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks for hanging out with us this week. If you'd like to connect with me or have an experience you'd like to share, shoot me an email at letstalkitoutproductions@gmail.com. If you liked our music, you can check out Quilter on Spotify. I Know How You Feel drops every other week. See you next time.